And then the world exploded. When German armies crashed into Poland in September 1939, Benjamin Salomon read the headlines with a tightening knot in his chest. He knew exactly what was happening to Jews across Europe. He understood the nature of the regime now on the march, and he knew, deep down, that he could not remain in Beverly Hills, polishing smiles and filling cavities, while the world burned. Ben walked into an army recruiting office and asked to enlist. The recruiter scanned his paperwork, shook his head, and sent him away. Too many volunteers, not enough equipment. The army was choosing carefully. Ben tried again with the Canadian Army, already locked in combat overseas. Rejected. He wasn't a Canadian citizen, so he returned to his practice and waited, following the war obsessively. France fell. Britain stood alone. German armies surged east. Then, in the fall of 1940, the Selective Service Act passed. His draft notice arrived, and to his own surprise, Ben Salomon felt relief. Private Benjamin Salomon reported to basic training with the 102nd Infantry Regiment in October 1940. The other recruits sized him up instantly, a Beverly Hills dentist with clean hands and a neat haircut, and decided he wouldn't last a week, maybe less. They couldn't have been more wrong. On the rifle range, Salomon qualified expert with both rifle and pistol, the highest score possible. The instructors watched him shoot and asked where he'd learned. Boy Scouts, he replied, barely looking up. In physical training, he outran men 10 years younger. On forced marches, he carried extra gear for those falling behind. After the first month, his commanding officer pulled him aside. "Salomon," he said, "you're the best all-around soldier in this regiment, possibly the best I've ever seen." Within a year, Ben Salomon was a sergeant, placed in charge of a heavy machine gun section armed with 30 caliber 917 Brownings, the kind of firepower designed to break enemy assaults. And in that role, he discovered something unexpected. He loved it. Not the idea of killing. He hadn't fired a shot in anger, but the discipline, the coordination, the precise science of controlled fire, knowing exactly where every round would land. It reminded him of dentistry. Careful, exacting, total concentration. This was where he belonged. He felt certain of it. Then, in 1942, the Army reviewed his file, and everything changed. Doctor of Dental Medicine. He was ordered to accept a commission in the Dental Corps. The words hit him like a punch. He protested. He asked to remain with his infantry unit. He begged his commanding officer to intervene. A formal request was submitted, asking that Salomon be commissioned as an infantry officer instead. Denied. The Army needed dentists more than machine gunners. That was the decision made by someone far from the front. And so First Lieutenant Benjamin Salomon was shipped to Hawaii, where he would spend the next year and a half filling cavities instead of fighting a war. Most officers would have accepted it. A safe post, palm trees, good food, comfortable quarters, almost no chance of dying. Ben Salomon was not most officers. In May 1943, he was assigned as Regimental Dental Officer for the 105th Infantry Regiment, 27th Infantry Division. On paper, it was a comfortable job. Patients in the morning, paperwork in the afternoon, evenings free. Other dental officers went to the beach or played golf. Ben did neither. Every morning he treated his patients, fast and precise, steady hands, calm voice. He was good at it, but that was only the beginning. Fast, precise, gentle with the nervous ones. The soldiers liked him. They called him Doc Salomon, and the way they said it carried real respect. But dentistry was only half of Ben Salomon's day. Every afternoon he changed into a field uniform and joined the infantry companies for training. He ran their obstacle courses. He pushed their hikes to 20 miles under full pack, through suffocating Hawaiian heat and jungle so dense you could barely see the man ahead of you. He fired on their ranges, keeping his edge razor sharp. At first, the infantry officers thought he was out of his mind. "You're a dentist," they told him. "You don't have to do this." Ben ignored them. Day after day, week after week, he showed up. And he didn't just keep pace, he dominated. He won every regimental competition: marksmanship, endurance, field problems. One officer later recalled the humiliation of watching a dentist outperform seasoned riflemen across the board. Even the regimental commander, Colonel Leonard Bishop, took notice. After one exercise, he pulled Ben aside. "Solomon," he said, "you're the best instructor in infantry tactics we have. Half my officers could learn from you." The enlisted men saw it too. Here was an officer who had every excuse to stay clean and comfortable, choosing instead to suffer alongside them. He never complained, never leaned on his rank. He simply worked harder than anyone else. One soldier remembered years later that Ben had a way of lifting everyone around him. You'd see this dentist, soaked in sweat and mud, grinning like he was enjoying every second. And you'd think, if he can do it, what excuse do I have? In June 1944, Ben Salomon finally got his chance. The 105th Infantry Regiment was headed for Saipan, a Japanese-held island in the Marianas. Washington wanted it for one reason: Saipan would put American B-29 bombers within range of Tokyo. The Japanese understood that perfectly. They had packed the island with tens of thousands of troops and vowed to fight to the last man. Everyone knew the battle would be savage. When the 2nd Battalion surgeon was wounded by mortar fire on June 22nd, Ben didn't hesitate. He volunteered to take over the aid station. The commander hesitated. It wasn't protocol. Dentists weren't trained for battlefield trauma. But men were bleeding out while officers debated regulations. "All right, Salomon," he said. "It's yours." Captain Benjamin Salomon, DDS, was finally going to war. Saipan was hell on earth. The landings had begun on June 15th, and by the time Ben reached the front, the fighting had already raged for a week. Casualties poured in by the hundreds. Entire companies were being shredded for yards of ground. The 2nd Battalion alone lost half its strength, securing a single peninsula. The Japanese didn't retreat. They vanished into caves, bunkers, and fortified positions that had to be taken one blood-soaked step at a time. Their mortars and artillery were zeroed in on every approach, and the killing showed no sign of slowing. The Pacific War wasn't just a series of grand naval battles. It was a grueling, island-by-island crawl through some of the most unforgiving terrain on Earth. And on the island of Saipan, in the summer of 1944, that reality was drenched in blood. By night, Japanese soldiers, masters of infiltration, would slip through the American lines like ghosts, their silent blades a constant, terrifying threat. By day, the fighting was a desperate, close-quarters struggle, often ending in what the Americans called suicidal fury, the banzai charge. In the midst of this relentless chaos stood— He wasn't a front-line infantryman. He was a dentist, assigned as the regimental surgeon. His command post was a small canvas tent, marked with a red cross, situated just 100 yards behind the front line. It was supposed to be a place of healing, a sanctuary from the storm. But on Saipan, there were no sanctuaries. The thin canvas walls offered no protection from the mortar shells that screamed overhead or the sniper rounds that could find their mark at any moment. Captain Ben Salomon. Inside, wounded men flooded in, carried on stretchers or crawling on their own. The air was thick with the smell of blood and antiseptic, punctuated by the screams of the injured. Amidst it all, Ben Salomon worked with an almost unnatural calm. His hands, once trained for the delicate work of dentistry, were now steady as he performed emergency surgery, triaging wounds and trying to hold back the tide of death that threatened to overwhelm his small aid station. The ground shook with each nearby explosion, but Salomon never flinched, his focus entirely on the soldier in front of him. Inside that tent, the scene was one of controlled chaos. Then came the 6th of July. The American forces had pushed the Japanese defenders into a small corner of the island. Facing annihilation, the Japanese commander, General Saito, issued his final order. It wasn't an order to retreat or surrender. It was an order for Gyokusai, a shattering of the jewel. Every soldier, every able-bodied civilian, was to participate in one final, glorious charge. Their goal was simple and terrifying: to die, but to take 10 Americans with them. Over 5,000 starving, wounded, but fiercely determined defenders prepared for their last battle. As darkness fell on July the 6th, a heavy, humid stillness settled over the jungle. The air was thick and breathless. American GIs dug into their foxholes, listened intently to the sounds of the night. It started with whispers on the wind, a strange shuffling in the undergrowth just beyond their lines. They knew something was wrong. The usual nighttime probes and skirmish felt different this time, more organized, more determined. These weren't just isolated attacks. They were the preliminary tests, the first tremors before the earthquake. As midnight passed, a chilling realization spread through the American lines. The real storm wasn't just coming. It was coming with the dawn. The largest banzai charge of the entire war was about to be unleashed, and Ben Salomon's aid station was directly in its path. What happened next would become one of the most incredible stories of heroism in American military history. Thank you for watching, and be sure to subscribe for more stories of courage from the pages of history. At 4:45 a.m. on July 7th, 1944, it came. American flares burst into the sky, flooding the beach with harsh white light, and out of the jungle poured thousands of Japanese soldiers, an immense human wave nearly a mile wide, screaming "Tenno Banzai" as they charged straight into the guns. Major Edward McCarthy, commanding the 2nd Battalion, would later struggle to describe the sight. It reminded him of a cattle stampede in an old movie. The camera low to the ground, the herd rushing forward, leaping over everything in its path. Except this time, it didn't stop. The wave just kept coming. The Americans opened fire with everything they had. Machine guns ripped into the mass, tracers carving red lines through the darkness. Artillery shells detonated among the attackers, flinging bodies into the air. One Marine battery lowered its 105mm howitzers to point-blank range and fired canister rounds, turning the guns into enormous shotguns. It wasn't enough. The Japanese kept advancing, climbing over the dead without hesitation. Some carried rifles and bayonets. Others wielded bamboo spears, knives lashed to poles, or nothing at all. Just the will to reach the American lines and die killing someone. Still, they came. By 5 a.m., the perimeter shattered. Japanese soldiers flooded through the breaches, and the fight collapsed into savage hand-to-hand combat. Rifle fire dissolved into screams, grunts, and the sickening sound of steel finding flesh. 50 yards behind the disintegrating line, Ben Salomon heard the battle closing in. Wounded men began pouring into the aid station, staggering, crawling, carried by their friends. Within minutes, the small tent was packed with 30 casualties, with more arriving every moment. The air was thick with blood cordite and terror. Ben moved from stretcher to stretcher, making brutal decisions on instinct alone. This one first. He might live. This one can wait. This one, there's nothing to be done. His hands never shook, even as the noise of battle grew louder outside. Then the tent flap exploded inward. A Japanese soldier lunged inside, bayonet raised. Ben saw his eyes, wide, feral, locked onto a wounded American lying helpless near the entrance. There was no time to think. Ben snatched an M1 Garand from a nearby table, dropped into a practiced firing stance, and pulled the trigger. The soldier collapsed, dead before he hit the floor, his bayonet clattering in the dirt. Ben turned back to his patients. There were too many wounded, too few supplies. The gunfire was almost on top of them now. He reached for a bandage, and 2 more Japanese soldiers forced their way into the tent. The first was already swinging his rifle. Ben didn't aim. He swung his own weapon like a club, smashing the stock into the man's face and dropping him. He reversed the rifle, drove the butt into the second soldier's chest, then fired and bayoneted them both before either could recover. He had barely drawn a breath when 4 more enemy soldiers crawled under the tent walls, 2 from each side, attacking at once. The aid station erupted into chaos. Wounded men screamed and tried to drag themselves away. Medics scrambled for cover. Ben moved like a man possessed. He kicked a knife from one attacker's hand, seized it, and shot the man down. He bayoneted the second. He spun and drove the captured blade into the third, fighting not like a dentist, not like a doctor, but like a cornered infantryman who refused to let his patients die. The fourth attacker lunged at him. Ben had no bullets left, no time, no space. He drove his forehead into the man's face, staggering him backward. From a stretcher nearby, a wounded sergeant with a shattered leg managed to draw his pistol and fire twice. The Japanese soldier collapsed. Silence. At least inside the tent. Outside, the battle still raged, but within the aid station nothing moved except Ben Salomon, standing amid 8 dead enemy soldiers, soaked in blood. Around him, 30 wounded Americans stared in shock and awe. Medics pressed themselves against the canvas walls. Beyond the tent, the roar of thousands of Japanese soldiers rolled closer, like a rising flood. Ben made his decision. "Get the wounded out," he ordered. "Everyone who can move, head for the regimental aid station. Help the ones who can't walk." A medic protested. It was hundreds of yards across open ground. They didn't even know where the enemy was. "Do it now." Ben's voice ended the argument. He picked up a rifle from one of the dead, checked the magazine, fixed the bayonet. "I'll hold them off." Someone tried to stop him. Ben didn't look back. "That's an order." Those were the last words anyone ever heard Benjamin Salomon speak. He burst from the tent into pure chaos. The 2nd Battalion was coming apart. The defensive line no longer existed. No front, no rear, only scattered pockets of Americans fighting for their lives against an endless tide. Men ran, fired, screamed, and fell. Japanese soldiers were everywhere, shooting, stabbing, shrieking their battle cries. The noise was deafening, a single wall of gunfire, explosions, and human screams. Near the aid station, Ben spotted a sandbagged machine gun position, a Dabur .30 caliber M117 Browning, the same weapon he had commanded back in the 102nd Infantry. the same gun he had trained on before the army decided he was too valuable to fight. 4 men had manned it. All 4 were dead, slumped over the bags, one still clutching the ammunition belt. Ben shoved a body aside and dropped behind the gun. It was still operational. The belt was half full. He swung the barrel toward the oncoming enemy and opened fire. In trained hands, the M1917 was a nightmare, water-cooled, belt-fed, capable of sustained, merciless fire. Ben Salomon fed belt after belt through the receiver as the Japanese charged in waves, screaming, bayonets fixed, determined to overrun the lone gunner tearing through their ranks. Reload, fire, reload, fire. The barrel grew hot enough to burn flesh. Steam hissed from the cooling jacket. Bodies piled up in front of the position, one layer, then another, then another. Ben kept firing. They came at him with bayonets. Ben cut them down before they reached 10 yards. They hurled grenades. Some detonated close enough to shred his uniform and drive shrapnel into his arms and legs. Ben kept firing. A sniper's round slammed into his side. He felt the impact, felt the warmth of blood spreading beneath his shirt. He kept firing. Another bullet, then another. His strength ebbed with every hit, blood pooling beneath him in the sand. But every second he stayed behind that gun was another second the wounded could escape, another second bought with his life. So he kept firing. No one knows exactly when it happened. At some point, the bodies piled so high in front of the gun that Ben could no longer see over them. 3 and 4 layers deep. A wall of the dead blocking his field of fire. A lesser man might have stopped there, might have accepted that he'd done enough. Ben Salomon did not. Shot and stabbed, bleeding from wounds he'd stopped counting. He dragged the 93-pound machine gun to a new position, set it down, fed in a fresh belt, and opened fire again. He repositioned that gun 4 times during the battle. 4 times, because each time the dead piled too high to see the living still coming. The last time he moved it, he was barely able to stand. Blood loss had drained his strength. He hauled the gun through the sand, leaving a dark red trail behind him that would still be visible the next day. Somehow, he got it into place. He fed in one final belt and fired until there was nothing left. No ammunition, no strength, no life. The battle raged for 15 hours. When it finally ended, the 1st and 2nd Battalions of the 105th Infantry had suffered 918 casualties, 406 dead, 512 wounded, more than 80% of their strength wiped out in a single night. It was among the worst one-day losses suffered by any American unit in the Pacific. The Japanese losses were even greater. Over 4,300 lay dead, their bodies carpeting the ground near Tanapag. The largest banzai charge of the war had been stopped. On July 8th, American forces reclaimed the shattered ground. Major General George Greiner personally led the inspection of the battlefield. Near the abandoned machine gun position, they found Ben Salomon's body slumped over the weapon. Captain Edmund Love, the division historian, was there. Years later, he described what they saw. 98 Japanese bodies lay piled in front of the gun. Salomon had been forced to move it 4 separate times to maintain a clear field of fire. 98. 1 man. 1 machine gun. Love recalled how the blood on the ground told the story. How you could almost see Salomon, wounded and bleeding, dragging the gun forward a few more feet, determined to keep firing. When doctors examined his body, they counted 76 bullet wounds. They stopped counting bayonet wounds somewhere around 20. At least 24 of those injuries had been inflicted while he was still alive. Shot, stabbed, torn apart, and still fighting. No one will ever know how many Americans reached safety because Ben Salomon stayed behind that gun. No one will ever know how many lives were saved because one man, a dentist, who wasn't supposed to be there, chose to stand alone against an army. Captain Benjamin Salomon killed more enemy soldiers in a single action than almost any other American in World War II. He did it while wounded. He did it while dying. And he did it to protect men who could not protect themselves. After the battle, Captain Edmund Love gathered eyewitness accounts and submitted a recommendation for the Medal of Honor. The facts seemed undeniable. 98 enemy dead, dozens of wounded Americans saved, a medical officer who gave his life defending his patients. The request was denied. Major General George Greiner, the division commander, refused to approve it. His reasoning was technical and devastating. Salomon had been wearing a Red Cross brassard, marking him as medical personnel. Under the Geneva Convention, medical officers were not supposed to bear arms against the enemy. The irony was almost unbearable. Japanese troops had stormed a clearly marked aid station, bayoneted wounded men on stretchers, violated every law of war, and the response was to deny recognition to the man who stopped them. Never mind that medical personnel were permitted to use weapons in defense of themselves and their patients. Never mind that Salomon had no choice at all. Fight or watch helpless men be slaughtered. The bureaucracy said no. In 1951, Love tried again. The recommendation went nowhere. The deadline for World War II awards had expired. In 1969, the Army Surgeon General made another attempt. The paperwork reached the Secretary of Defense's office and was returned without explanation. For 58 years, Ben Salomon's sacrifice remained officially unrecognized. Then, in 1998, Dr. Robert West of the USC School of Dentistry, the same school where Salomon had earned his degree decades earlier, came across the story while researching the school's history. On May 1st, 2002, 58 years after he died on a beach on Saipan, the Medal of Honor was presented at the White House. There was no family left to receive it. Ben Salomon had been an only child. His father had died decades earlier, still fighting for his son's recognition. There were no siblings, no wife, no children. No one who had known him personally remained. No one who knew him is with us this afternoon, the president said. Yet America will always know Benjamin Lewis Salomon by the citation to be read shortly. Dr. Robert West accepted the medal on behalf of the USC School of Dentistry. It remains there today, displayed in glass, a silent reminder of the dentist who became a warrior. Captain Benjamin Salomon was just 29 years old when he died on Saipan. He never married, never had children, never returned to his dental practice in Beverly Hills. He never cleaned another actor's teeth or gave another struggling starlet a free checkup. He could have stayed in Hawaii, spending the war in safety, filling cavities and filing reports while others fought and died. The Army had decided he was too valuable to risk in combat. But Ben Salomon understood something the Army did not, that some men are born for war, and no degree or title can change what is in a man's blood. For 2 years, they made him be a dentist. For 2 years, they told him he didn't belong on the battlefield. And for 2 years, Ben Salomon trained anyway, running with the infantry, firing on their ranges, proving again and again that he was the best soldier in the regiment, even if they wouldn't let him fight. When his moment finally came, he didn't hesitate. When the enemy came for his patients, the dentist became a warrior. When 4 men fell at a machine gun, he took their place. When the dead piled too high to see, he dragged the weapon forward and began again. 24 wounds inflicted while he was still alive. 98 enemy soldiers dead. One man against an army. They called him Doc Hollywood. They said a dentist didn't belong in combat. Ben Salomon proved them wrong. The 105th Infantry Regiment of the 27th Infantry Division received the Presidential Unit Citation for its actions on July 7, 1944. 2 other soldiers from the regiment, Lieutenant Colonel William O. Orion and Sergeant Thomas Baker, were also awarded the Medal of Honor for that same battle. Today, a dental clinic at Fort Benning, Georgia, bears Ben Salomon's name. It treats soldiers who may never know his story, but who live under the legacy he left behind. Some men save lives by healing the wounded. Others save lives by stopping the enemy. Ben Salomon did both.